From 2021, it's Tom and Jerry. And this is actually the second Tom and Jerry feature film. There was one in the early 90s, which I really wasn't a fan of, but I'm a huge fan of Tom and Jerry. And because of that, after seeing the trailer for this, I really didn't want to see it. But your brother, Colin, really wanted to. So I bought another month of HBO Max, and we watched this last night. And I have to say, I actually thought it was decent, and I had a good time watching it. And I felt like it was true to the spirit of what Tom and Jerry is.
I kind of had the same idea. I wasn't excited mainly because when I saw the trailer, mainly because of the animation of Tom and Jerry, because I've seen Tom and Jerry on TV before. And so I didn't like how they made the animation more modern. But that was really the only thing for me in the trailer. When I came and I watched it, at first I wasn't too crazy about it, but then I kind of got used to it.
I think the animation for those two characters is sort of a pastiche of all the different incarnations of Tom and Jerry throughout the years. And I think they hit it just about right. It really feels mostly like the Hanna-Barbera era of Tom and Jerry. Now, when I was a kid, I saw these on TV. I didn't realize that they were shorts that were produced for theatrical display in front of feature films way back. I didn't understand that there were different versions of Tom and Jerry, although as a kid I could see the difference in the animation. The Hanna-Barbera ones were the most famous, and that was the longest running and award-winning of the Tom and Jerry series. Then when Hanna-Barbera let it go, a man named Gene Deitch took over, and he actually works on this film. It was his last film. He passed away in April of 2020, but he did get to work on this Tom and Jerry film, which I thought was great. And also William Hanna has an influence here because they used archival footage of his voice. So when you hear Tom yell or when he's falling and he screams, that's William Hanna. Mel Blanc and June Foray's voices were also used in that way. After Hanna-Barbera, Gene Deitch took over, and those Tom and Jerry cartoons were the ones that had the more exotic locations, like the Acropolis, or when they're on the whaling boat, like Moby Dick. Dickie Mo, I think it's called in the cartoon. After that, Chuck Jones took over, and you can definitely see the Chuck Jones animation. Chuck Jones, of course, was with Looney Tunes, and Tom takes on an appearance more like Wile E. Coyote in those cartoons, or the Grinch, because Chuck Jones did the cartoon version of the Grinch. I think Tom resembles those characters, and Jerry actually resembles Max, the Grinch's dog.
I can see that.
And Chuck Jones put a lot more characterization into those characters because he didn't really come from the same school of thought as Tom and Jerry's originators did. Disney cartoons were always known for their beautiful animation. Looney Tunes was always known for their great characterizations. Tom and Jerry was known for their frenetic pacing and their innovative chases and action sequences. And Chuck Jones didn't really do that at first. At first he gave him a lot of characterization. And then later in the 80s there was a revival by Hanna-Barbera, and it was a little different. And Jerry wore a bow tie and they were friends because of the rules about children's cartoons and programming at that time. But I think this movie hits the right balance between the Hanna-Barbera period with the chase sequences and the look of the characters, with a little bit of influence from Chuck Jones and a little bit of influence from Gene Deitch's eras. And I think it works pretty well. And there's some great shout outs in the film, like the Batman sequence, which is really great for me.
Yes, I did like when they took some of the things, and you pointed most of them out, otherwise I wouldn't have known, but when they would use Tom and Jerry, and even Spike in some parts, they would use some stuff from the cartoons.
Yeah, they gave him actual shtick or bits that they did in the cartoons. So at one point, when Tom hits Spike in the head, Spike gets a bump on his head, and then Tom uses the club to tap the bump down. That's right out of a cartoon. They do that several times throughout the course of the movie, where it's a tribute to all those past short films. And I think that's great. It reminded me again of the Peanuts movie, where they had sequences in the Peanuts movie that basically were out of those holiday specials or the comic strips that we remembered. And it brought you back, it gave you nostalgia. But again, this film does for Tom and Jerry what the Peanuts film does for those characters, which is introduces it to a new generation, brings it up to modern times, but still incorporates the traditional elements of those cartoons.
Yes, and I really liked that about this. But one of the things that I didn't like was how it focused, for me anyway, it focused more on the humans than Tom, Jerry, and Spike, and whatever other animals were in here. I liked seeing Tom and Jerry. I think when they were on screen, it was great. I did like Kayla, especially when she was with Tom. I didn't mind the story, although I think they focused too much on it.
I was surprised in some ways when they do these things. Like Garfield was not a successful version of this interaction where they took a cartoon character and put it with live action. Same thing with Rocky and Bullwinkle, and I expected that to happen here. I think they did it because they felt like these two characters couldn't sustain a feature film. An hour-and-a-half long feature film. What are you going to do with that if you don't incorporate another story? So instead of using an animated story, they used real-life characters. I was actually impressed with the way they weaved it in. When they're running around and they're breaking things off the wall, I kept looking at it going, how, they break this sconce off the wall, and Tom runs by it, and all of a sudden this thing cracks and the plaster breaks, and I thought, how did they do that? I know it's digital and I could figure it out, but still it looked great. I thought they really did a great job of incorporating the two and meshing it together so it looks seamless.
Yes, I think that it was very interesting how they did that. I liked having the other story. I really didn't mind it. I just thought they didn't focus enough on Tom and Jerry.
And I get that. I mean, Tom and Jerry bring their brand of chaos to this story, which is basically, it's a hotel, and the hotel is hosting this major event. It's these two huge social media personalities who are getting married, and it's all around this wedding. Michael Peña plays the events coordinator, and he's kind of the villain of the piece. Rob Delaney is sort of the manager of the hotel. He plays a great part. You might remember him from Deadpool 2, where he plays the mustached guy that Deadpool is really a fan of and puts him on the X-Force. He's great in this part. And then Chloë Grace Moretz is sort of our main character. She plays Kayla, as you referenced, and she comes in, she wants this job. So she hijacks somebody else's resume, gets put in place as a temp events person, and she says she'll catch the mouse once they find out there's a mouse in the hotel. She brings Tom on staff to help her catch the mouse. That's how Tom gets incorporated. But I thought that the characters all interacted with Tom and Jerry in a really great way, especially Kayla's character and Michael Peña's Terrence as the villain. He was great with those two characters because you can see, how he's manipulating the situation. So for me, I actually thought the story was just enough story, and it gave Tom and Jerry a reason to be there and a reason for their chaos. I see where you're coming from, though, and I'm surprised that I'm not necessarily completely agreeing with you, but I thought it was a decent balance between the two.
Yeah, I get that. I do think it was very creative how they got, especially when Kayla is holding Tom's head, when she's patting him on the head, right, and then she holds his chin too. How did she know exactly where to put her hands?
Right, and I know they set that up. I mean, I know they set it up for her, but still it looked so good. I love the part where, there's the fish, and it's the fish that we remember from the episodes, is on Rob Delaney's desk, and Tom's looking at it, and he's going to the fishbowl, and Kayla just reaches out and grabs him by the head and pulls him back, and his reaction and her gesture, it never seemed, we saw we rewatched the SpongeBob movie recently where they have some live actors in it, and there are points where you can see those actors not really looking where the characters wound up being. I didn't see that in this film. I thought that was pretty seamless. I thought that was well done. Wherever the actor was looking was where the character was. In fact, when the doorman and Kayla are both looking down at Tom, they're looking at exactly the same spot, which seems simple. You put a stick there and an X and tell them to look at the X. But you'd be surprised how many movies it just doesn't go well in. Like, they're not looking in the same spot. Here they were.
Right. And I really don't have too many criticisms with this. I only have two others, which are, I feel like the pigeons in this, the three pigeons, really, it's not that they were singing modern, which was the other thing, but it was more like they really didn't need to be in here.
I agree with that. I see where you're coming from with that. They seemed extraneous. It wasn't necessary. I think it was one of these things where the director or the writer maybe thought it was a really good idea and they really liked it, and then they kept going with it, and maybe they went with it a little too much. I didn't mind it at the beginning when they introduced the film. But then when we went back to them a couple times, I didn't like that. I agree.
Yes, and then when they would use the modern music, I didn't like that. I think that when Tom sings at one point, which I wasn't too crazy about, especially with the modern music, but I didn't feel like it had to be in here.
I understand that. There is a tradition where Tom always sings to female cats that he's sort of infatuated with, and they did incorporate that here. He's singing to Toodles, or Toots as they call her in the movie. But what he sang didn't necessarily work for me. I did think it was good that they put music underneath the chase sequences, because that's so much a part of Tom and Jerry. But it was modern music, and it actually, in some cases, it worked for me. Some of the songs worked for me, some of them didn't. That was a major problem with the 80s version of the Tom and Jerry cartoon, was they used this kind of canned 80s music that they used for a lot of other cartoons instead of the classical music, the classical orchestration that was obviously done when the composer was watching the cartoon and actually wrote it and underscored the cartoon. In the 80s, it was just canned music put underneath that wasn't really orchestrated to the individual moments. Here, sometimes the songs they picked worked for the action. Sometimes they didn't. I did like that they always used music when Tom and Jerry were doing their shtick, though.
I did like that, even if it was modern music. I actually paid attention more to Tom and Jerry than the music. The only time I really did like the modern music is when Kayla and Tom are walking slowly down the hall, and it's the wild cat thing.
Yes,
I thought
and he's
that
coming
worked.
through. Yeah, it looked like, it looked like that great sequence that you see in all those movies where they're walking in slow motion.
But it was funny.
It was funny. There's several shout outs in the film. There's a point at the beginning where Jerry's looking for a place to live, and there's a rat that's showing him a place, and he says, "This is a great mouse house." And he says, "Wait, can I say that? Is that copyrighted?" I thought that was hilarious. I love the part where Tom, and again, this was a shout out to the cartoons, where he's flying. He's got wings, and he's flying at one point, and he goes up in front of the moon, and it looks like the Batman silhouette. That's right out of the film. I loved when we find Droopy. At one point, Tom and Jerry get taken to the pound, and they see Droopy, and Droopy's behind bars at the pound, and he looks like Hannibal Lecter. I thought there were some great moments here. I love how Jerry hands Kayla a business card, and it's really small, and he hands it to her, and then she brings it up, and it's in her hand. And it was a great moment, great seamless transition, and she's looking at it, and then she's like, and wait a minute, it's scented? And it was that was a funny moment. But then later, she has a business card and she gives it, and if you noticed, it was very, very subtle, but Jerry sniffs the card and rolls his eyes because it's not scented. But it's off to the side and you'd barely notice it. But I thought, this is the kind of detail that the filmmakers put in that shows that they love the source material. And that's what I like about the film. The people who made it like those characters. This wasn't a throwaway, this wasn't a cash grab. I think they legitimately wanted to bring Tom and Jerry to a new generation, and I actually bought into that.
Yes, I thought that overall this was okay. I think when Tom and Jerry are having fun arguing with each other, I guess, and chasing each other, I liked that. I liked how they did incorporate a human story. I just felt like they needed to focus on Tom and Jerry more. The only other thing is that there's an end credit scene.
Yes, there is an end credit scene, but go ahead. I know exactly what you're going to say.
I feel like it should have ended with Tom and Jerry, not the humans.
I agree. It is funny, but it's Michael Peña, Rob Delaney, and then the groom, and Tom and Jerry don't make an appearance. So while it's a funny joke, it really, I agree, it should have been Tom and Jerry.
Yes.
And I see what you're saying about the human story, and I get that. I just guess I felt like they really liked Tom and Jerry, and they wanted to do right by them, and I felt like they did for this film. Especially when we've seen some other films where some of these really beloved cartoon characters have not been treated as well. So for me, I can't believe I'm saying it, but this is definitely one to see.
For me, it's one for free. There are good parts about this, I guess. I think that Tom and Jerry were really cool. I wish they would have put "That's all, folks" at the end of the movie, but that's it.
Looney Tunes. But
they use it at Tom and Jerry sometimes.
Maybe the end credit scene could have been Tom, roaring in the circle like, well, I guess it's not MGM now, it's Warner Brothers, so they couldn't do that. In any case, I really did enjoy it despite what I thought was going to happen. So in spite of myself, I liked it.
Me too.
Okay.
See what I did there?
Oh, Daddy.